localities to be able to authorize funds that would improve, expand, or develop or redevelop federal and military installations to enhance the installation's military value. I think it's been about 2 weeks ago, Chief of Staff of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Navy both came down and said that we're still going to face probably BRAC in 2018, and that as far as we know, unless something changes in DOD, there'll be some form of BRAC that we'll have to take part of. I think the work that Delegate Anderson and myself have done on the Commission on Military Installation and Defense Activities has done a lot for us to put us in the right posture to actually grow during BRAC, and this would just be another way that we help to show DOD that we're in the right posture to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reeves, thank you. I don't remember the concept being embedded in the budget as passed last year. I do remember the bills as standalone bills coming through this committee on both sides and not being reported out. Was there some additional language that made its way into the budget that mirrors this concept?
It's pretty close to the exact language made it into the budget last year.
Into the final version. All right. We are going to take questions from the subcommittee if there are any. Does anybody on the subcommittee have any questions? Delegate O'Bannon.
So I understand the concept. I guess the question is that we are now using state dollars to fix up things that the federal government will in.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Dr. O'Bannon, what it does is it allows us the opportunity to combine state monies, if we have the opportunity, with federal monies to help fix some of those issues with regard to not inside the wire but outside the wire, so to speak, around our military installations. I'll give you an example. It's not in my district, but just south of my district is AP Hill. And AP Hill has some ranges that are dark ranges. And I think Delegate Lehman-Filter and I think the chairman understand that, and maybe some of you all that have served, where night vision is critical and light discipline. And so in that situation, Caroline County and Spotsylvania County had some development issues with regard to developing right near where some of those night-sensitive ranges were. In those situations, it was worked out through various avenues and ways to issue through that. But if we would have had this in place, it would have made it a little bit easier to negotiate between the county and the developers and the installation commanders about that impact of that development on that situation. And so this really just sets up the framework for us to allow to do that. Whether or not we'll have money to actually put towards it, that's a whole nother issue.
Sure. Delegate Lehman-Filter.
Mr. Chairman, one of the persistent issues that we deal with in capital, as you well know, is who owns the asset. At the end of the day, when taxpayer money is used, who owns the asset? We actually, if you recall, Mr. Chairman, I think you were elected at the time when a former governor suggested that we bond to purchase open space or easements. And the problem with easements is that's not an asset that the taxpayer can hold, because an easement by definition continues to be the property of the person granting the easement. That's not this case, but the similar problem is present, which is if I build family housing, as an example, if I were to build family housing on an installation at Virginia taxpayer expense, who would own those houses? And I would suggest to you the federal government would tell you they own those houses.
I tend to agree. I don't know if the senator has an opinion on that statement or not. One of the concerns, Senator Reeves, that I have is we have a list of state projects that would require state debt that we are currently not funding and turning away. I would hate to add to that list of projects, federal projects, that may or may not take precedent over state projects that we currently can't fund. I mean, you know as well as I, the National Guard has tremendous needs just with state projects and state funding. And before I get comfortable with an idea of using state bonding authority for federal projects, I'd like to see that entire list checked off and move forward. So that's one of my fundamental concerns with the approach.
Let me see if I can just maybe put a little bit of that at ease. Before any of this stuff would even be approved, it'd have to go through that Commission on Military Installations, Fixed Activities, or whatever successor entity is going forward. I can just tell you, based on my understanding, Mr. Chairman, you might know this as well, with regard to the MILCON dollars that are coming for a lot of our armories and some of those things. This primarily is setting up, when we have those issues, the ability to actually possibly even address those issues, because right now we don't have an entity to do that. It's, garrison commander going to a board of supervisors, trying to work those things out. And we're trying to put us in the posture, which is we're already there due to budget language, but in the code to actually set that up for them. So it's really clarifying language that's already been passed through. So.
Sure, the senator brings up an interesting point with MILCON dollars, but the difference, and it's not a degree, it's a fairly significant difference, is that those MILCON dollars go into assets that are ours on the book. We own the armories. Now, you raise a good point, because the chairman and I are both in the subcommittee. I chair on public safety. We are going forward. We're going to be looking at a big project, and the big project is, what are we doing with our armories in general? We've got a lot of them. They're in the wrong places. Should we take more of a regional approach? And how do we do that, and how are we additive as a state? Those projects are exactly the ones that the chairman is referring to, because at some point we may want to be additive from state dollars to a state asset.
Right.
And if I had a choice between what's being proposed here and doing something with armories, I'd kind of go with armories. That's just my point, Mr. Chairman.
Well, sure. Yeah, sure.
Anyone in the audience like to speak in favor of the bill? Is there anyone in the audience like to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, any further questions from the subcommittee? I'm going to give the senator his last word. Senator, I'll allow you to.
Mr. Chairman, the bill's pretty simple. I believe that, but I would dogleg on what Colonel Lingenfelter said is, I've already talked on that issue. If we could talk maybe off this dais a little bit later about our state police field offices that need repair. I know one's in Fredericksburg. We talked about with the MILCON dollars for that armory in Fredericksburg, adding the state police and extra ground, and they work out of that same armory. So I think there are some real tax savings when we start looking at that. I'll just expand on that, but that's, the MMIE is what it is, Mr. Chairman. So I think it just really allows us the opportunity to get to the table, have a vehicle to which have those discussions and help possibly mitigate and prepare for those things. It's just an asset to utilize. Whether or not we ever get any real money to it, I don't know.
Senator, I appreciate your leadership over the last couple of years on this. I still can't wrap my mind around it, as I stated in my original comments. What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there is a motion and a second to gently lay the bill on the table. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Senator, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right, our final bill is Senator McDougal. Senator, I know you've been bouncing around as well, and I appreciate you making your way up here. We could probably get an opportunity to hear your presentation of Senate Bill 843. The members should give their attention to the senator, Senator McDougal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to actually present it. I think this is about the 5th or 6th year that we've introduced this, and first time to actually talk to you all about it. Mr. Chairman, the issue is, and I think regardless of whether there's a Republican gubernatorial administration or Democratic gubernatorial administration, at the end of that administration, a budget is produced, and then that budget is sent to the legislature, and the governor is no longer with us. So they present a budget that oftentimes, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat, proves to be more political in nature and maybe not as policy focused as it could be, in large part because those governors don't have to live with any of the ramifications from that introduced budget. So in looking at this came up with the proposal to eliminate that. So the governor would come in, when the governor's elected, they would be in year 2 of a budget, much like the year we're in now. So they're making amendments or changes to the budget and not actually dealing with the new proposal. And then when in their 3rd year of their term, they would submit a 2-year budget and they would have to live with the 1st year. I think it would make the budgeting processes more responsible and smoother as we go through and eliminate some of those challenges that we typically have in year 4 of an administration and in year 1 of a new administration, regardless of what it is. But Mr. Chairman, I do recognize the one difference that this does. For the Senate, it has very little impact. The House, it switches the years in which y'all are running and a budget is presented. So it does have that, that's the biggest substantive change indeed. But I do think that this would make the budgeting process, regardless of the political affiliation of the individual in the executive mansion, smoother.
And I appreciate the senator's thought process, and certainly you've articulated it well. And I'm glad you brought up that it does have a much bigger impact on us. As we are every 2 years, we would then be the ones kind of straddling the budget cycle in having an off-year election that comes in the middle of a budget and having to have an opinion on the mid-year. I'd like to get the senator's opinion on the fact that as a legislative prerogative, it's our authority to appropriate funds. The governor's budget is usually interesting, but it's just a starting point, and we ultimately will decide what the budget will look like. And so, do you feel like we're ceding any power to the executive branch versus our legislative authority to appropriate funds?
Mr. Chairman, I think actually the opposite, because what happens is with the requirement constitutionally the governor introduce a budget proposal, and I don't know that there's a requirement that a member of the House or Senate actually carry that bill, but don't know that anybody can remember a time when that proposal has not been the bill that's been carried. We do start from that point, and I believe, and I do not have exact numbers, so I wouldn't want to be quoted as being 100% accurate, but typically we alter the gubernatorial's budget, the governor's introduced budget, 4 to 5% in more aggressive years. I think there was 1 year under then Governor Kane where we had a more aggressive movement of the budget. So I think that because of the significant starting point that you have with the governor's introduced budget, that we have a greater ability to have impact with this than we do there. And it ends up that last year, again, of whoever the governor is and whichever party they happen to be affiliated with, that last year tends to be more political in nature, and it tends to be more challenging for us as we're trying to unwind some of those politics and deal with actual policy. So I agree with Chairman that that is our responsibility, but because we have in anybody's recorded history moved off the governor's introduced proposal, this would have I think it would give us greater authority because we're moving off a starting point that's more grounded in reality.
Mr. Chairman, any questions to the subcommittee? Yes, Delia Stallings.
I guess my concern is that this would actually make it more political, because now we're doing a budget in an election year. And I can think back to within this administration where 1 year we didn't have a budget, I want to say until late May, over political wrangling and trying to do a campaign at the same time you're still trying to do a budget. Seems to me that is a recipe for political maneuvering rather than actually focusing on what the budget should be. There has to be, it seems to me we're setting up for more politics rather than less politics by moving it into an election year.
And the gentleman might remember that I grew a 3-inch beard that year during an election year. So that was bad news. That was bad news for everybody.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, let me let the senator respond to Delegate Stallings.
I do think we have a different perspective on that because of the bodies we each serve in. But I think as Delegate Greason articulated, politics are going to be, to some extent, in any budgetary process, and different ideas are going to be in any budgetary process, because at times the executive branch thinks differently than the legislative branch, usually incorrectly in that thought process, but they do have those incorrect thoughts every now and again. But one of the things that occurs if the governor still has to deal with the ramifications of that introduced budget. So they still have, I think it tempers some of their politics. It won't eliminate things like what we've dealt with the governor's insistence on Medicaid expansion that we've been able to tamp down. That won't eliminate, but what it will eliminate is wholehearted spending and tax increases like we saw the end of, I believe it was 2008, 2009, and we had to deal with, again, my facts I think are somewhat accurate, about a $6 billion swing in what was the actual revenue than what was the budgetary revenue, and it was extremely painful. And that's when it was as a result of those experiences that I started introducing this. So I understand the difference of perspectives because the House does have to run every 2 years, and certainly respect that, and appreciate the opportunity to articulate why I think that this is still a good idea even in light of that, but I very much understand why you would have that concern.
Further questions or comments?
Just a brief question. Yep, Delegate O'Bannon.
Were you in the Senate or the House when you started introducing?
I was in the Senate, so I got wisdom when I started introducing this.
Oh, I have a motion. I'll Delegate Lingenfelter.
Just a brief observation. I mean, we're going into an election year this year, and I think that, at least from our viewpoint, and meaning no harm to what your concept, because I fully understand where you are, and I don't see anything untoward in what's being proposed, except that there are some issues that concern me, and they are, in these elections, for us anyway, they are vibrant discussions about budget priorities. We're going to have a gubernatorial election this year. You're going to have people contending to be the chief executive. They will very likely have different priorities on their budget, and one of them will win in November, and then they're there. And they're in a place to, I think, early on, begin to shape where they want to go. So, anyway, just a thought about the importance of the discussion that goes on.
Is there anyone in the audience like to speak in favor of the bill? Is there anyone in the audience like to speak in opposition to the bill?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just put Delegate Lingenfelter and I think agree conceptually on that, but what I see happens in reality, because that new governor gets elected in November, old governor introduces or presents the budget in December, the new governor has just had their team in place. Sometimes that team has not even been approved by this body, the Senate and the House, and their ability to actually put in practice any of the ideas that they ran on will have to wait for 2 more years when they have their full budget. So that's exactly where I'm trying to get to. We might have different perspectives, but I appreciate the committee actually listening to this concept, and we'll likely have the conversation again on a different non-election year.
There might be a chief executive one year that might agree with you.
Yeah, it might be.
All right. We've asked the audience. We've heard from the senator. What's your pleasure on the bill? There is a motion and a second to gently table this idea that will take a couple years to ferment, potentially. All those in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Thank you.
Senator McDougall,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that we all do agree that a 4-year governor is much better than any of the other options that were presented.
All right, that's all the business before us. The committee shall rise. Thank you.
All right.